The unexpected encounter. James had always dreamed of adventure, but nothing in his wildest thoughts prepared him for the moment when he found himself standing before the alien queen. He had just completed a dangerous mission on a distant planet, his crew safely on board their ship. But before he could even catch his breath, a strange, shimmering light appeared in the sky. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was something much more. Out of the light, a massive spaceship descended slowly, its sleek metal surface reflecting the stars. It landed softly, and the ground shook beneath James's feet. He knew something big was about to happen, but nothing could prepare him for what came next. The doors of the ship opened, and from within emerged the alien queen. Her presence was overwhelming, tall, regal, and beautiful beyond words. She wore a flowing gown made of silken fabric that shimmered like the night sky. Her skin glowed faintly, and her eyes, the color of the deepest space, held a power that made James feel small and insignificant. The queen's guards surrounded her, armed with weapons that looked more like works of art than tools of war. They looked at James with cold eyes, but the queen herself did not seem concerned with him at all. She took a step forward, her eyes never leaving him. James didn't know what to do. His heart pounded in his chest. He was just a human, standing before one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Yet there was something in her gaze, something that told him she wasn't here to destroy him. But why was she here? What did she want? The queen stopped just a few feet away from him. Her voice was soft, yet strong, like a distant thunderstorm. "I've heard of you, human," she said, her voice carrying through the silence. "You've done the impossible. You've fought against all odds and come out victorious. For that, I offer you a gift." James blinked, unsure if he was hearing correctly. A gift? From an alien queen. "I am offering you a wish," she continued. "One wish. You may ask for anything, and I will grant it. But beware, human. The wish you ask for must be something I cannot refuse." James's mind raced. A wish? Was this some kind of trick? He looked at the queen, who waited patiently, her expression unreadable. Was she testing him? Or was she really offering him something real? He thought of all the things he could ask for: wealth, power, a life free of danger. But none of that seemed right. There was something more important, something that called to him in the silence of space. The queen's eyes never left him. "Choose wisely, for once you speak, there is no going back." James swallowed hard. What could he possibly ask for that would be worthy of such an offer? He had never believed in magic or wishes. Everything he had earned in his life had been through hard work and struggle. But now, in front of this powerful being, he felt something inside him stir. He began, but his voice faltered. What if he asked for the wrong thing? What if it angered her? But deep down, he knew what he wanted. He wasn't like the others who would ask for power or fame. His wish would be different. "I wish," he started, gathering his courage. The words felt strange coming from his mouth, but they felt right. "I wish, for you." The queen's eyes widened slightly. She didn't move, but there was a shift in her presence. The air seemed to hum with tension. Her guards exchanged confused glances, but the queen did not look away from James. She was studying him, trying to understand what he meant. "You wish, for me?" Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "Explain yourself." James felt a surge of confidence. This was not about control or possession. This was not about claiming her as a prize. He was not some conqueror. He had always admired strength and wisdom, and there was no one in the galaxy more powerful, more enigmatic than her. "I don't want to rule you," he said. "I don't want to own you. I want to understand you. I want to learn from you. You're more than just a queen. You're someone who commands a galaxy, but I think there's more to you than that. I want to know the real you." For a moment, the queen said nothing. The silence stretched, and James began to feel the weight of his words. Had he just made a mistake? Was his wish too bold, too foolish? The queen's expression remained unchanged, but her eyes softened. Slowly, she took a step closer to him. "You wish to know me?" she asked, as if testing the sincerity of his words. James nodded, his heart racing. "Yes, not as a ruler or a queen, but as a person, someone who has experienced the things I never will. I want to understand." The queen stood silently for a moment longer, her eyes locked with his. Then slowly she nodded. "Very well, human," she said, her voice no longer cold, but warm with something almost like curiosity. "I grant your wish, but be warned, this journey will change you forever." The tension in the air lifted, but James knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same again. A bold choice. James stood there, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The queen, her eyes glowing like twin stars, studied him as though he were a puzzle she hadn't yet solved. Her regal presence was intimidating, but there was something different in her gaze now, something softer, like she was beginning to see him not just as a human, but as someone who might be worth her attention. But then the silence broke. A low murmur rippled through the queen's guards, and the air seemed to grow colder. They clearly didn't like what James had said. Whispers turned to hushed voices, and then to open discussion. The council was unsure how to react to a request so different. They had expected a wish for wealth, power, or even revenge, anything that would serve the queen's empire. But this was unexpected. One of the council members, a tall alien with pale blue skin and sharp features, stepped forward. His voice was sharp and biting as he spoke to the queen. "Your Majesty cannot be serious. A human asking for you? This is an insult to your station, to your dignity." He turned to James, his eyes full of contempt. "Do you think yourself worthy of such a request? You are nothing but a fleeting moment in the long history of the galaxy. Why would the queen grant you such a gift?" James met the alien's gaze, his pulse racing, but he refused to back down. "I'm not asking for her to rule beside me, or for her to bow before me," he said, his voice steady despite the tension building around him. "I'm asking for something that only she can offer, a chance to know her, to understand her beyond the titles and the crown. She's more than just a ruler, and I want to see that. I want to see her." The queen's expression remained unreadable, but James could feel her presence shift. It wasn't anger or frustration, but something else, perhaps amusement or perhaps curiosity. She didn't speak right away, and the silence stretched out like an eternity. The council member who had spoken earlier was seething. "You are a fool, human," he spat. "If you think you can simply ask for the queen's companionship, you'll be crushed beneath the weight of your own foolishness." Before James could respond, the queen raised a hand. The room fell silent. "Enough," she said, her voice commanding, yet soft. "You will speak when I allow it." She turned her gaze to James, her eyes narrowing as if considering his request in a way no one else could understand. The alien council fell silent, watching the queen as if expecting her to make a final decision. Her gaze flicked back to the human, and for a brief moment, there was something almost human in her eyes. A flash of vulnerability, quickly masked by the impervious mask of royalty. "You wish for me," she said slowly, the words lingering between them. "But you do not ask for power or to rule my kingdom. You ask for something far more dangerous. You wish to know me. But I warn you, James of Earth, to tread carefully. I am not a creature of kindness. I have ruled for centuries, fought wars, and made decisions that would haunt most for lifetimes. You may think you know what you want, but you do not yet understand the price of such a wish." James swallowed hard. The tension in the room thickened, the eyes of the council burning into him. The queen was not like anyone he had ever met. There was an almost predatory aura around her, and yet, in that moment, she seemed more like an enigma than a monster. She was more than just a queen. She was a force of nature. But James couldn't turn back now. "I'm not afraid," he said, his voice steady. "I know this could change everything, but I'm willing to take that risk. I want to know you, not just as a queen, but as someone who has lived a life none of us could ever understand. I think I can help you too." The Queen's eyes softened for a fraction of a second before she hid her emotions behind a mask once more. She was silent for a long while, her expression unreadable. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her decision. Finally, she spoke, her voice colder now, yet with a hint of something else, something that sounded like curiosity. "Very well, human," she said, her gaze piercing. "I grant you your wish. But remember, you have chosen a path that very few have walked, and even fewer have survived." Her words sent a chill down James's spine. Was she threatening him or warning him? Either way, he knew that the path ahead was uncertain, but it was the only one he could take. There was no turning back now. The Queen turned to her council, her voice firm. "Prepare the ship. We leave at once. We will take this human on his journey, and we will see if he truly understands what he has asked for." As the Queen's command rippled through her forces, James stood rooted in place, his heart pounding in his chest. He had asked for her. He had chosen her. And now he would follow her into the unknown. A deal struck. The Queen's ship was unlike anything James had ever seen. The sleek, dark hull of the vessel gleamed under the stars as it ascended into the cold expanse of space. The entire interior seemed to pulse with life, as though the ship itself was alive, each corridor, each room, throbbing with a mysterious energy. The walls were lined with strange symbols and alien technology, things James couldn't even begin to understand. James felt small as he wandered through the ship, following the Queen's royal guard. Their eyes followed him with an intensity that was unsettling. He had never been more aware of how different he was, how much of an outsider he was in this alien world. Yet, strangely, there was a sense of purpose within him. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back now. After what felt like hours, he was brought to the heart of the ship, a massive chamber that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The room was empty except for a large, circular table in the center, illuminated by an otherworldly glow. The Queen was already waiting for him there, her posture regal and commanding as always. "Sit," she commanded, her voice soft but firm. James hesitated for a moment before taking the seat opposite her. He couldn't help but notice the intensity of her gaze, the way she seemed to study him as though she were trying to peel back his every thought. He swallowed hard, knowing that whatever happened next would shape the rest of his life. The Queen leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "You have asked for something few would dare even consider. You wish to know me, to understand me. But understand this, human. I am not someone who can be easily understood. There are parts of me that no one, not even my closest advisors, have ever seen." James nodded, feeling both awe and nervousness. "I understand, but I'm not asking to possess you or change who you are. I simply want to see beyond the crown, beyond the legend. I want to see the real you, the person who has lived through centuries of war, betrayal, and power." The Queen's lips curled into the slightest of smiles. "You think you want to know me, but you have no idea what that entails." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken tension. James could feel the weight of her words, the gravity of the situation he had placed himself in. Was he truly prepared for what was to come? What had he gotten himself into? She broke the silence first. "You are brave, human. I'll give you that. But bravery alone won't be enough. You will face challenges here that will test you in ways you cannot imagine. If you fail, you will not only lose your life, but you will lose the chance to understand me, to see the truth behind my existence." James didn't flinch. "I'm ready for whatever comes." The Queen studied him for a long time, her eyes never leaving his. Then she sat back, her demeanor shifting just slightly, though the coldness never fully left her. "Very well. I'll tell you the truth, but you must understand that this is not a story of glory or power. It is the story of a soul that has been forged in fire. A story that could break you, human." James nodded, his heart pounding, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I was not always a queen," she said, her voice softer now, tinged with something ancient. I was born like you, weak and insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But I was chosen, not by fate, but by necessity. The universe demanded strength, and I rose to meet that challenge. I became what the galaxy needed me to be, a ruler who could unite fractured worlds and lead them through the chaos of endless wars. She paused for a moment, her eyes distant as though recalling memories long buried. But power comes at a price, she continued, her voice barely a whisper. The more you rule, the more you lose yourself. I became a weapon, a symbol, and in doing so, I lost the parts of me that made me human. I no longer felt anything. My emotions became tools for manipulation, my desires mere echoes of what they once were. I lost love, I lost trust. I became a ruler not by choice, but by necessity. And now I am more queen than person. James listened intently, his heart aching for her. He had expected a cold, distant ruler, someone with no connection to the world around her. But what he heard now was different. She wasn't just a queen. She was a woman who had sacrificed everything for her empire, and in doing so, had lost herself in the process. Is that why you offered me a wish? James asked softly. You wanted someone to see you, not as the queen, but as the person you used to be. The queen didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gazed out into the stars, her expression distant and unreadable. For a brief moment, James thought she might cry. But then the moment passed, and she turned her gaze back to him. Perhaps, she said, her voice still soft, but heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Perhaps I am looking for something I have lost, or perhaps I am simply tired of ruling alone. The tension in the room shifted. James could feel it in the air. The connection between them was no longer just about a wish granted, but something deeper, something more dangerous. He was no longer just a human at the mercy of an alien queen. He was a part of something much bigger now, a part of her world, and a world that was, in many ways, more complex than he could have imagined. And what happens now? James asked, his voice barely a whisper. The queen leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. Now we begin. You will learn more than you ever expected, human. And if you survive, you may just see the person I once was. But understand this, survival is not guaranteed. Not for you and not for me. James felt the weight of her words. This was no simple wish. This was a journey into the heart of power, loss, and survival. And there was no turning back now. Into the abyss. The days blended together in the vast silence of space as James and the Queen's ship sailed through the cosmic void. Every corner of the ship felt alien, strange, cold, and ever watchful. The crew moved with precision, their actions synchronized, as if they were part of some greater machine. But it wasn't the crew that kept James on edge. It was the Queen. She was everywhere and nowhere, always just out of reach. Whenever he sought her out to speak, she was always in another part of the ship, studying, commanding, or simply lost in thought. There were moments, though, when their paths would cross, moments when the air between them would crackle with unspoken tension. In those fleeting seconds, he could almost feel the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders. He could sense the centuries of pain and loss that had shaped her, but also the sharp edge of her strength that refused to break. One evening, as the ship drifted through a region of space known for its black holes and dangerous anomalies, James finally found the Queen. She was standing in front of a massive viewing window, looking out at the swirling darkness of the void. The stars seemed to bend and twist in the space around her, caught in the gravitational pull of an unseen force. James approached cautiously, unsure of what to say. The Queen had been silent for so long, her eyes distant and closed off, as if she were guarding herself from the universe. But now, in the presence of the void, she looked different, vulnerable perhaps, or maybe just lost. He cleared his throat. "What's out there?" he asked, gesturing to the blackness beyond the window. The Queen turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his with a flicker of something. Was it recognition? Pain? It was hard to tell. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than usual. "The abyss," she said simply. It is the space between stars, between life and death. It is where civilizations are forgotten, where everything that once was drifts into nothingness. And yet, it is where I feel most alive. James stepped closer, his heart racing. He hadn't expected her to open up like this. It felt like she was letting him see a part of her that no one else had ever glimpsed. "I thought a queen like you would be surrounded by light," he said, his voice low. "Glory, power, warmth. Isn't that what you've earned after all these years?" The queen's lips curled into a bitter smile. "I have earned nothing human, nothing at all. Power is an illusion. It is the abyss that holds the truth of the universe, unforgiving, relentless, and inescapable. Everything we hold dear is destined to fall into it." James felt a chill run through him as he stared out into the abyss with her. He had never thought of space as a place of death. To him, it had always been a place of discovery, adventure, and wonder. But now, standing beside the queen, the darkness seemed less like a vast ocean of stars and more like a graveyard of forgotten souls. "Then why fight it?" James asked. "Why keep going if everything is destined to fall into the abyss?" The queen's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "Because, human, that is what it means to live. We fight against the abyss, even knowing that we will never win. It is the struggle that defines us, not the victory. You may understand that someday." James wasn't sure if he understood her fully, but he could sense that she wasn't speaking just of space or of battles and conquests. She was speaking of herself, of the endless weight she carried as queen. "I don't want to be like you," he said, more to himself than to her. "I don't want to rule a galaxy or be caught in a cycle of endless power. I just want to be me." The queen turned to him, her expression unreadable. "And what is it you want to be, human?" James looked her in the eyes, his voice unwavering. "I want to understand. I want to understand what drives you. What made you choose this path, even knowing the cost?" She was silent for a long moment, as though weighing his words. Then her lips parted in the faintest of smiles, a smile that was not of kindness, but of something else, something far more complex. "Very well," she said, her voice softening. "You will learn what it means to walk in the darkness. You will learn what it costs to know the truth." And just like that, the moment passed. She turned away from him, her focus shifting back to the stars outside the window. But James felt a sense of finality settle in the air. He had crossed a line. He had asked the queen to open up, and in doing so, had triggered something inside her. But with that came a price. As much as he wanted to know her, the truth might be too much for him to bear. The abyss was not just a place in space. It was a part of her, a part of the galaxy itself. It was the darkness that had shaped her, and now perhaps it would shape him as well. The next day, the queen summoned him again. This time, there were no words of kindness, no soft smiles, only a cold, sharp command. "Prepare yourself, James. We are approaching the Rapture Nebula, the heart of the galaxy's most dangerous trials. If you are to understand me fully, you must survive what lies ahead. Only then will you truly see what I have seen and understand what I have become." James felt a wave of dread sweep over him. He had no idea what was to come. But one thing was certain: the abyss was no longer just a metaphor. It was real, and it was waiting for him. The Rapture Nebula. The ship shuddered violently as they neared the Rapture Nebula, a swirling mass of gas, dust, and cosmic energy that was both beautiful and terrifying. The nebula was infamous for being a place of trials, where those seeking power, wisdom, or truth had to face their deepest fears, desires, and regrets. It was a region of space that had claimed the lives of many, including some of the galaxy's most powerful beings. Legends whispered that the nebula didn't just test the body, it tested the very soul. James stood at the observation deck, watching as the ship slowly entered the edges of the nebula. The colors outside the window were mesmerizing, bright hues of violet, blue, and red swirling together in an endless dance. But there was something sinister about it, something that gnawed at his mind. The air felt charged with energy, like the very fabric of space was about to snap. "You know what this place is, don't you?" The Queen's voice came from behind him, low and commanding. James turned to face her, surprised by her sudden appearance. The intensity in her eyes was sharper than ever. "The Rapture Nebula. I know it's dangerous, but why are we here? What do you want me to learn?" The Queen's lips curled into a thin smile, though it held no warmth. "This place is where I came to understand my true self. It is where I faced the abyss, James, and where I learned to wield its power. It is where I was broken and remade." She moved toward him, her steps silent on the metal floor. "You wanted to understand me. Now you will. The trials ahead will force you to confront everything you are. It will break you, just as it did me. And if you survive, you may walk away with something far more valuable than any treasure, the knowledge of who you truly are." James swallowed hard. He had heard stories about the Rapture Nebula, about how it twisted time and reality, how it brought people face to face with their greatest fears. But he hadn't expected it to be so real. This wasn't just some distant myth or rumor. He could feel the weight of it in his bones, in the air around him. "You're telling me I have to go in there?" James asked, his voice trembling slightly despite his attempt to sound brave. "Yes," she said simply. "The nebula doesn't care about bravery, James. It only cares about what you're hiding from yourself. It will expose it, and you will have no choice but to face it." Before he could respond, the ship lurched again, the whole vessel vibrating violently. The lights flickered, and the crew scrambled to their stations, their movements frantic but efficient. The Queen's guards remained calm, their faces impassive as they braced for the trials ahead. The Queen didn't flinch. "It has begun," she said quietly. "Prepare yourself." James was ushered into the central chamber, where the Queen stood waiting, her posture regal as always. The room seemed to darken as the ship plunged deeper into the nebula, the walls pulsing with an eerie glow. At the center of the chamber stood a large holographic platform, its surface alive with shifting images and symbols. The Queen gestured for him to step forward. "Step onto the platform," she instructed. "It will show you what you fear most, what you desire most, and what you regret most. It will not pull punches, James. Be ready for what comes." James hesitated for a moment, his heartbeat hammering in his chest. There was no turning back. With a deep breath, he stepped onto the platform. Immediately, the world around him seemed to warp and bend. The chamber dissolved into a blur of light and color. He felt himself falling, tumbling through a vortex of visions that didn't make sense, yet felt hauntingly familiar. He was standing in a small room. The walls were familiar, his childhood bedroom. He could hear the laughter of children, the soft hum of a family in the background. But something was wrong. There was a coldness to the air, an emptiness in the space that he hadn't noticed before. And then he saw her, his mother, standing by the window, her back turned. She looked the same as he remembered her, gentle, loving, always there for him. But as he approached her, something felt off. Her shoulders were tense, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. "Mom," he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She didn't respond. Slowly, she turned to face him. Her eyes were empty, hollow, as if she had seen something terrible, something that had drained her of life. The room seemed to grow colder. "Why did you leave me?" she asked in a voice that was not her own. "Why did you abandon me?" James recoiled, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But it felt real. The pain in her eyes, the accusation in her voice, he could feel it tearing at him, breaking him. "I didn't leave you," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I never wanted to leave you." Her figure began to fade, her features blurring as if she were dissolving into the air. The room began to collapse around him, the walls closing in, the floor cracking beneath his feet. He stumbled backward, his chest tightening. The darkness engulfed him, and he fell into another vision. This time, he was standing in front of a massive army. The Queen stood beside him, her eyes cold and unreadable as she gazed upon the battlefield. Thousands of soldiers, alien and human alike, were kneeling before them, awaiting their orders. But it wasn't victory he saw in their eyes, it was fear. Fear of failure. Fear of what would happen if they didn't win. And in the center of the field stood a single familiar face. His own. James's heart stopped. He was looking at himself. But this version of him wasn't the man he had become. This was a version of him he had buried deep within. The man who had once dreamed of being a hero, of saving others. The man who had failed. "I am not who I thought I was," he whispered to himself. "I've been lying to myself." The battlefield erupted in chaos, soldiers falling to the ground in agony. His vision flickered again. Then he was alone in the dark, surrounded by an emptiness that threatened to consume him. His mind screamed in panic, but he couldn't escape the weight of his own fears. "Face it," a voice whispered in the darkness. It was the Queen's voice, but it was distorted, echoing as though it were coming from everywhere. "You asked for this, James. You wanted to understand me, to understand the abyss. Now you must confront yourself." Suddenly, everything went black. Confronting the abyss. James awoke with a start, gasping for air as if he had been drowning. His body was drenched in sweat, his heart pounding erratically. The room around him was dark, the low hum of the ship the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. The vision he had just experienced still clung to him like a heavy fog, each detail seared into his memory. His mother's accusing eyes, the army of soldiers kneeling in fear, and the haunting face of the man he used to be. He wiped his brow, trying to steady his breath. But no matter how hard he tried, the feeling of suffocating in the abyss, of being lost in his own mind, didn't leave him. It felt as though he was being dragged deeper into the darkness with each passing second. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Before he could respond, the door slid open with a quiet hiss, and the Queen stepped inside, her presence as commanding as ever. She didn't look at him with the same cold detachment as before. Her gaze was focused, almost concerned. "You survived," she said, her voice carrying an unexpected weight, but not unchanged. James sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. His head felt heavy, like his thoughts were drowning in a sea of confusion. What was that? Why did it feel so real? The Queen crossed the room and stood beside him, her eyes locking with his. "The nebula doesn't lie, James. It shows you everything, the truth you refuse to acknowledge, the parts of yourself you've buried. I knew you would face your fears, but there is more to it than just fear. The trials you face here are a reflection of what you are capable of becoming, what you will become if you choose to fight the abyss." James looked at her, confused. "But I don't want to be like you. I don't want power or control. I don't want to lead people into war or ruin." The Queen's lips tightened slightly. "You misunderstand. The abyss is not about power, James. It is about choice. What you choose to do with your life, with the strength you have, is what defines you. Not the galaxy, not the crown, not the throne. The abyss forces you to see what lies beneath your surface, and the only way to move forward is to accept it." She paused, her expression unreadable. "But you still do not understand. You want to know the truth about me, about why I gave you that wish you desired so badly. You think this is all some sort of test, some trial to prove your worth. But that was never the point." James blinked, trying to wrap his mind around her words. The weight of the previous trial still hung over him, and now it seemed like she was talking in riddles. Then what is the point? Why are we here? What are we supposed to do now? The Queen's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, before hardening again. "We are here to confront our destiny, to face the abyss and come out on the other side with something stronger. The choice is yours, James. You can walk away from this, return to your old life, and live with the burden of never knowing the truth. Or you can embrace the abyss, let it consume you, and become something greater than you ever imagined." James shook his head, his mind still reeling from the images of his past. "But I'm not like you. I can't just embrace this darkness." The Queen stepped closer, her voice low but firm. No one is born like me. I was once just a human, just like you. I faced the abyss and chose to become something more than what I was. That is the true power of the nebula, the power to change, to evolve, to accept the truth of who you are and what you are capable of. Her eyes narrowed, as if daring him to deny her words. You want to be a hero, James. You want to make a difference in the world. But you cannot do that while hiding from your own darkness. You cannot fight the galaxy's enemies if you cannot even face yourself. Her words hit him like a tidal wave. He had always believed that he could change the world by standing for what was good, by fighting for justice. But what if he was only running from the truth? What if the very darkness he feared was the key to his strength? I don't know if I can, James muttered, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know if I'm strong enough to confront it, to become what you want me to be. The Queen's gaze softened for a brief moment, an emotion flashing across her face that he couldn't quite place. You don't need to be strong enough yet, James. The strength will come. But you must first confront what you are hiding from. That is the first step. A silence fell between them, thick and heavy. James could feel his heart racing, his mind spinning with the weight of her words. He wanted to understand. He wanted to be strong enough to face the abyss. But deep down, he wasn't sure if he could, if he was willing to pay the price. Suddenly, the lights on the ship flickered. The ship groaned as if it was struggling against some unseen force. The Queen's eyes darkened, and she turned sharply to the controls. We've reached the heart of the Rapture Nebula. It's time for the final trial. James's stomach dropped. He had already faced his deepest fears. He had already been shown the parts of himself that he wished he could forget. What could possibly be left? You've learned the first lesson, the Queen said, her voice low and commanding. Now the nebula will show you what you are willing to sacrifice to move forward. Prepare yourself, James. The true test is about to begin. As the ship plunged deeper into the heart of the nebula, the space around them began to warp. James could feel the pressure building, a force pulling at him from all sides. He had no idea what was coming, but he knew one thing for certain. This final trial would change him forever. He could no longer hide from the truth. The abyss was waiting. Embracing the abyss. The ship trembled violently as it descended into the heart of the Rapture Nebula, its core pulsing with a dark energy that seemed to warp reality itself. The once serene colors of the nebula had given way to a foreboding blackness, lit only by flashes of raw cosmic power. James could feel the pressure in his chest, as if the very fabric of space was compressing him, threatening to crush him under its weight. His mind was racing. The Queen's words echoed in his thoughts. The true test is about to begin. What did that mean? What was left to face? Standing at the helm of the ship, he could see the deep, swirling abyss ahead. It seemed endless, stretching into the unknown. His heart pounded in his chest as a cold, gnawing fear gripped him. What if he wasn't strong enough? What if he failed? The Queen stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the vortex ahead, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to say anything. The tension between them was palpable. James knew this was the moment that would define who he was, who he would become. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly, her voice softer than before. The hardness in her tone had melted, replaced by something almost human. For a brief moment, she seemed almost vulnerable. "I don't know," James replied, his voice tight with uncertainty. "I don't think anyone can be ready for this." Her eyes flickered to him, a flicker of something, sympathy, perhaps. "You don't need to be ready, James. You only need to face it. The truth, the pain, the darkness, it's all a part of you. You can't hide from it anymore." James took a deep breath. His entire journey had been a descent into his own fears and regrets, and now here he was, on the cusp of facing the ultimate trial. Would he step into the abyss, or would he turn away, forever haunted by the truth? The lights on the ship flickered again, and the room was bathed in an eerie, flickering glow. The energy around them grew even more intense, almost suffocating, as if the very air itself was alive with tension. Without warning, The ship lurched, and the walls began to shift and distort. The familiar surroundings of the ship began to dissolve, replaced by an empty void that stretched out into nothingness. The sound of distant voices filled the air, whispering in languages he couldn't understand, a chorus of fragmented memories and forgotten dreams. James's knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the cold, shifting floor. His breath came in ragged gasps as he tried to make sense of the overwhelming images and sensations assaulting him. He saw flashes of his past, his mother's face, full of sorrow and regret, the army of soldiers kneeling in fear. Only now, their eyes were different. Now, they looked at him as though he were the one they feared. "You aren't who you think you are," a voice hissed from the darkness. "You never were." The words cut through him like a blade. His mind reeled as he tried to comprehend what was happening. This was it, the final test. The abyss was showing him the truth about himself, and it was more painful than he could have imagined. He clutched his chest, struggling to breathe. The fear was overwhelming, the weight of his regrets suffocating him. What if this was it? What if he couldn't escape the darkness? But then a different thought emerged. A thought he had never allowed himself to entertain before. What if he didn't need to escape? What if the only way to move forward was to embrace the darkness, to accept that it was a part of him, of who he was? The voice came again, softer this time, like a whisper in his ear. "Embrace it. Embrace the abyss, and it will set you free." James closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He wasn't sure if he believed the voice, or if he was just too exhausted to fight anymore. But in that moment, he made a choice. He would stop running. He would stop hiding from the truth, from the fear, from the parts of himself he had buried for so long. The abyss was not a place of destruction, it was a place of transformation. With a final, steadying breath, James stood. He faced the void head-on, letting go of his fear, his guilt, his regrets. The darkness surged toward him, but instead of recoiling, he embraced it. He welcomed the pain, the fear, the raw power of everything he had tried to suppress. In that instant, the nebula shifted, as if acknowledging his acceptance. The space around him seemed to open up, revealing a new path, a new understanding. The pressure that had gripped his chest lifted, and the overwhelming weight of fear seemed to evaporate, replaced by a calm resolve. The Queen's voice reached him through the haze of his thoughts. "You did it. You've crossed the threshold." James's vision cleared, and he found himself standing on solid ground once more. The ship's familiar interior had returned, but something was different. The air felt lighter. The energy around him hummed with a strange, yet familiar power. He turned to the Queen, who stood beside him, her expression unreadable once again. But her eyes told a different story. There was respect there now, a silent understanding. "You've changed," she said, her voice almost reverent. "You've faced the abyss and come out stronger. But this is only the beginning, James. The galaxy is waiting for you. And now you are ready." James swallowed, his heart still racing from the intensity of the trial. What happens now? She gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Now you lead. Not because you have power, but because you understand what it means to truly be free. The choice you made, to face the abyss and accept it, is what will guide you. And when the time comes, you'll be ready to take on anything the galaxy throws at you." With that, she turned and walked toward the control panel. The ship began to hum to life, its engines roaring as they prepared to leave the heart of the nebula. James stood there for a moment, his thoughts swirling. He had been given a wish, and in return, he had faced his greatest fears, his deepest regrets, and the darkness within himself. But now, for the first time, he felt something new, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The Queen was right. This was only the beginning. And as the ship soared away from the nebula, James knew that the future, his future, was now in his hands. The abyss had not defeated him. It had made him stronger.